Hey guys, and welcome to the very first week of the NFL playoffs. It's Wildcard weekend. This is No Huddle Fantasy Sports, and we're talking DFS Wildcard weekend picks and plays for both DraftKings and FanDuel. Of course, the NFL regular season has come to an end, and with that, fantasy football seasonings are all over now. Whether championships have been won or lost, it doesn't matter. We're into the NFL playoffs, and we still have some fantasy football to be played. Daily fantasy football, both sites, DraftKings, FanDuel, all of that's covered here. So sit back, relax, and let's talk some DFS for Wildcard weekend. What's up, everyone, and welcome back to No Huddle Fantasy Sports. As always, thank you for finding this channel, clicking on these videos. You're here because we want to talk about DFS for this weekend, both DraftKings and FanDuel. This is Wildcard weekend, the first weekend of NFL playoffs. We have 4 total games, 8 total teams playing across 2 days. That's Saturday and Sunday. All slates start 4:30 on Saturday. And to quickly look at that, we're talking about Buffalo playing in Houston, Tennessee playing at New England, Minnesota playing in New Orleans in the final game of the weekend. Tomorrow night, we have Seattle playing in Philadelphia. And in this video, we're talking about main guys that I think you should include in your lineups if you're trying to play some DFS this weekend. But of course, in this video, I'm talking about the 4-game slate that might not include the main slate on DraftKings or FanDuel. I know on FanDuel, the main slate only includes today's games, Saturday games, but I'm trying to spread this out as much as I can, get as many teams, as many players involved. So in this video, keep in mind, I'm talking about a 4-game slate. Find that if you want to address this video. Of course, if you're playing just the 2-game slates, you can use some of the notes from this video to help you there. The only real weather concern I see right now is in New England. It's cold and it's rainy, so keep that in mind. The other games, Houston and New Orleans, play in a dome, of course, and the final game looks clear in Philadelphia. I will discuss lines and Vegas totals as we get through each player, but the one I want to mention is the New Orleans game, the New Orleans Saints in particular. That game will likely see the highest ownership, especially if you're playing either the 2-game slate tomorrow or all 4 games combined. New Orleans has the highest team total as a team, and it's also the highest point total for a Vegas game over under. So keep that in mind. Your most ownership, I'm not saying don't play these guys, I'll actually mention a few, are from the New Orleans Saints. So jumping right into it, the quarterbacks I'm looking to play this weekend, we're talking about Drew Brees and Josh Allen. Drew Brees, 6,600 on DraftKings, 8,500 on FanDuel. They're playing, of course, Minnesota at home in the Dome in New Orleans. 49.5 over-under, the highest over-under on the slate. Out of all games this weekend, the highest over-under. And they're a big favorite at 7.5. This, of course, is Drew Brees. He doesn't need much of an explanation. They've scored a ton of points all season long. They've blown teams out, even in blowouts. I realize this is a big spread for a quarterback. He's still scoring a ton of points. He's averaged 22-plus fantasy points per game and three or more touchdowns over his last 4 games. You got to like him finishing the season that way, going into the playoffs, playing at home. He's always been a guy that's played much better at home in the Dome. He has that going for his advantage this weekend, and he's had 27-plus fantasy points per game averaged at home this season. All good things we like to see, and a reason why I'm heavily invested in Drew Brees this weekend. Minnesota's defense is a good defense. I don't want to disregard that at all, but they are much different when playing on the road in 2019. In fact, the splits are pretty drastic. They've averaged or given up 17-plus fantasy points per game to quarterbacks on the road. So again, a defense that can be scary at times, but is much different when playing on the road. And finally here, if you're playing cash games, I don't know how you don't play Drew Brees. He's the safest option by far, but I'll be playing him in both cash and GPP tournament style games. Moving on, I like Josh Allen as my next guy. I was trying to pick a guy that might be lower owned compared to others since I'm going with Drew Brees. I think Josh Allen falls down a little bit in ownerships behind some of the other guys that are on the slate. He's 6,500 on DraftKings, 8,200 on FanDuel. He's playing on the road in Houston. He is an underdog, which I like, playing on the road, so they should trail. 43.5 over-under, not the greatest there, but it doesn't really matter for Josh Allen. They are getting 3 points. That might have dropped to 2.5 last I checked. Nonetheless, an underdog on the road playing in a dome. He offers upside, of course, with his rushing ability. We've seen it all season long. Averaged 7-plus rush attempts per game this season. And that gets even more interesting in the red zone, where he is a rushing TD threat. He's had 9 total touchdowns. I've seen him personally rush touchdowns this season within the 20, within the 5-yard line. So he's not scared to be a red zone threat with his legs. All good things in his favor. He plays very well on the road, in fact, this season. And he's facing a bottom-ranked defense in terms of points given up, defense versus position to the quarterback quarterback position. They're a top 5 matchup, as I mentioned, for quarterbacks. Houston's defense this season allowing 271 passing yards a game and 21 plus fantasy points per game to quarterbacks this season. So I do like Josh Allen. I, in fact, like them to win this game straight outright. If you're into that, if you're into betting and anything, and I think a lot of people do in favor. A lot of people are on Buffalo this weekend. I believe last I checked, it's a 60-40 split in favor of public money going towards Buffalo. So I do like Josh Allen this weekend. I do like Buffalo this weekend. Quickly moving on to the running back position here. The two guys I like this weekend, Devin Singletary and Derrick Henry. I will admit I struggled with running back this weekend. It's a bit tough considering there's not the greatest running backs in the world on the slate. Certain guys are playing away that I would like if they were playing at home. All that comes into play. But the first guy I want to mention is Devin Singletary is playing on the road in Houston. Buffalo is an underdog, but I do like them to win the game outright, and I like his involvement in the offense as of late. He's 6,000 on DraftKings, 6,500 on FanDuel. Better price, I believe, on FanDuel. But the biggest thing this year was that he, at least for the first half of the year, was at a 50-50 split in terms of time and touches with Frank Gore. Gore simply wouldn't go away. But as of late, it's been Devin Singletary. He's the guy they want. He's their young, good running back. He can catch the ball in the backfield, obviously can run the ball. He has finished the season as the main back with a lead back workload, something we like to see. He has had a brutal schedule and hasn't done much with it, but nonetheless, he's getting the usage. He's getting all of the snaps out of the backfield, especially if you look at Week 16, the last week the starters really played. He played 95% of the snaps, so he's not coming off the field. He's averaged 20-plus touches over his last 5 games, at least the last 5 games he's started. They don't count Week 17. He's approached 7 and 8 targets in games they've trailed, so as an underdog, he's not going to come off the field. If you look at the Baltimore game, if you look at the Cleveland game, he got 7 and 8 targets. You got to like that, especially in DraftKings where catches and targets mean so much more. Houston is a great matchup for him, though. Houston is a top 5 running back matchup. They're giving up 90-plus rushing yards a game and anywhere from 23 to 28 fantasy points per game, depending on DraftKings or FanDuel, to the running back position. So he's finally in a good position. He's finally in a good spot versus a weak run defense. I like Devin Singletary. I like Buffalo this weekend. Another guy I want to mention here is Derrick Henry for the Tennessee Titans. He, of course, is playing on the road in New England, and they are, again, underdogs, just like Devin Singletary. Not something I typically like to do with running backs. He's priced up there at $8,200 on DraftKings, $9,500 on FanDuel, but hear me out. I don't like really any other running backs. I just fell to Derrick Henry almost based upon solely his workload and the weather conditions in that game. But if you talk about Kamara, if you talk about other players that are priced up near him, I just don't like them as much. I don't think there's many running backs to really pick from. And the other thing is I liked Boston Scott a lot originally, but now we have Sanders practicing on Friday. He should be playing in that game. There's little question he won't play, so I'm off of Boston Scott. That landed me at Derrick Henry. And if you just look at him, it doesn't matter. Insane finish to the season, similar to what he did in 2018. He's getting massive volume. He had 32 rushes, 200-plus yards, and 3 touchdowns in Week 17. He has scored touchdowns in 11 of 15 weeks played. I love him for FanDuel purposes based upon that. You're hoping people kind of avoid him due to the Patriots, and that's a tough matchup versus a very tough defense. But if they're going to win this game, if Tennessee should win, which people do believe they have a chance to win, it's going to be on the ground. They're not going to throw the ball a million times versus the Patriots and win with Tannehill. I do love Tannehill, but I just don't think that's their method. That's their way of winning. They have to keep the ball on the ground. They have to control the ball. That's what they do so well. They have a great offensive line. I love the Tennessee Titans. I love Derrick Henry, and I think they have a shot this weekend to beat the Patriots if they stick to the plan. And if that plan goes to schedule, that'll include a ton of usage, a ton of volume for Derrick Henry. He'll get on the ground. He'll get in the end zone. I like that. If you want to talk about New England's defense, yes, it's tough, but the weakest part of that defense is their run ability to stop the run. If you talk about running backs that have gotten volume, good running backs, they've been successful. The 3 I've listed here are Chubb, Ingram, and Mixon. Obviously, Derrick Henry is right there with those guys, if not higher in terms of talent and volume. So I do like them in a rainy, cold game. They're going to keep the ball on the ground to win this game. I like Tennessee. I like Derrick Henry as my second back. Moving on to the wide receiver position, I'm going to talk about Michael Thomas simply because you should not avoid him this weekend. Whether it's cash or GPP, you got to play Michael Thomas, especially if you're going to play Drew Brees. Just stack him. It's a must stack with Drew Brees. He is expensive at $9,300 on DraftKings, $8,900 on FanDuel. I don't find it an issue to fit him in with Drew Brees stacks with the guys I've already mentioned. This should be okay. Of course, they're playing at home versus Minnesota. Biggest, highest score on the slate, over under at 49.5. They're big favorites at -7.5, but it hasn't mattered in the past. He still gets his. They have the highest team total. All good things for Drew Brees. All good things for Michael Thomas. I believe he's priced too low on FanDuel. FanDuel, if you know the difference between the two sites, FanDuel is typically priced much higher, but he's priced only at $8,900. So I do like him more on FanDuel. I like him on both sites, but more on FanDuel. Double-digit targets and 100-plus receiving yards a game in 8 of the 10 games he's played with Drew Brees. You gotta love that consistency. You gotta play him for those reasons. And I mean, if you want to talk about consistency, if you just look at his worst performance of the year, literally Michael Thomas's wide receiver worst performance of the year included a 9-reception, 95-yard game, resulting in 18 PPR points. You gotta love that. I mean, that is kind of his floor, is 18 points, especially on DraftKings. He's averaging even more than that, though, at home, especially where Drew Brees excels in the dome. Michael Thomas is averaging 28-plus fantasy points per game. I don't know why I'm spending so much time on him. You've played DFS. You know what he's done all season. Stick with Michael Thomas. Minnesota struggles with outside receivers. Michael Thomas should tear up versus them this weekend in a home game. Beyond Michael Thomas, trying to find some guys with lower ownership, I'm going with DK Metcalf for the Seattle Seahawks this weekend. $6,100 on DraftKings, $6,200 on FanDuel. Again, wide receivers on FanDuel are priced a little weird this weekend. It's a weird weekend in general, but a better price on FanDuel at $6,200. He's playing in Philadelphia in a away game, 45.5 over under. The difference here, though, is Seattle, I believe, still is favored by 1.5. Zach Ertz, we're going to talk about him in a minute. I just got listed as going to be active, so that line may have changed. But Seattle, a slight favorite right now. Really a pick'em game in my mind right now, playing in Philadelphia. It should be a good game in terms of weather, so I believe there's no issues with throwing the ball. But it's been an up and down finish for DK Metcalf this season. You saw him with 11 plus fantasy points in 4 or 5 games. Other games barely caught the ball, barely had any targets. So it is a bit of a risk here, but he does get decent red zone usage, possible TD regression. A lot of people like to look at red zone, amount of targets, and then how they've converted those targets. He hasn't done that too well this year, and I don't know if it's on him or Russell Wilson or a combination of the both, but you could possibly expect some touchdowns to come his way with the amount of usage he's gotten in the red zone. Good things. We want to score touchdowns here, right? Best wide receiver matchup on the slate. That's the biggest reason I like DK Metcalf. Philadelphia has struggled all year versus outside receivers. I do believe they played earlier this season. He didn't do much, but you got to go right back towards it. You got to go with the data. You got to go with the tried and true method. Philadelphia is bad against outside receivers, a primary position that DK Metcalf, he never goes to the slot. He's almost always exclusively on the outside in a good matchup with Philadelphia. And Philadelphia's defense specifically is allowing 39 plus fantasy points per game on DraftKings, 33 plus fantasy points per game on FanDuel to the wide receiver position. So again, a really good matchup for DK Metcalf. They're playing on the road in Philadelphia. Philadelphia has a good run-stopping defense to boot, and I think they're going to have to continue to throw the ball. They've lost all of their running backs. They got Marshawn Lynch in, I know that, but I do believe Russell Wilson and the gang is going to have to throw the ball a lot, and DK Metcalf is obviously a big part of that. Finally here, quickly wrapping things up with the tight end position. I'm going with 2 guys, really 1 guy, and that's Zach Ertz for Philadelphia. This is pretty much breaking news. A couple of minutes ago, he got rolled in, considered active, cleared to play. Hopefully that means he's going to play the whole game. Hopefully it's not a decoy. But he's $6,000 on DraftKings, $6,900 on FanDuel. Playing, I already mentioned, versus Seattle, playing a home game, 45.5 over under. Philadelphia is currently getting points. That may have changed, actually. I'll have to check. But pretty much a pick'em game. I already mentioned that. He's their biggest offensive weapon, especially through the air. He's an elite tight end. Could be an elite receiver if he played that position, really. But they have no one else. There's no other. Jeffrey's hurt. Every other Aguilar's hurt. They have to throw the ball to Zach Ertz when he's on the field. So you got to love him for that. And if you look back specifically, he's averaged 10 plus targets a game prior to his injury. You're talking like 10, 12, 14 targets every single game due to injuries, due to the fact he's the only guy. And to boot, to put more emphasis on Zach Ertz, Seattle's defense is the second worst against tight ends, meaning they give up the second most amount of points in terms of defense versus position to the tight end position. It's been a thing all year. I know we talk about the Arizona Cardinals, but just behind them is consistently the Seattle Seahawks. They've always been on the list, giving up 12 to 15 fantasy points per game to tight ends. I would like Zach Ertz regardless, but it just makes it even more attractive that he's playing a weak tight end defending team in Seattle. And if you want to go anywhere else, I would go with Jared Cook as my next guy here. A little bit cheaper on both sites, $4,900 on DraftKings, $6,500 on FanDuel. Playing, I mentioned, at home versus Minnesota in the Dome. Big over-under, a lot of points coming their way in terms of Vegas totals. New Orleans is a big favorite. All that plays into the game, into the amount of points that team's going to score. And Jared Cook's been a good part of that offense. I'm not going to say he's going to get 10 targets, 15 targets. He's a better value on DraftKings for that reason. But he finished the season pretty solidly. He averaged around 4 receptions, and he gets a lot of yards with those receptions. 4 receptions and 84 yards, almost per game exclusively over the last 6 games of the season. So you got to like that, especially for his price. He's had a minimum of 44 reception yards over his last 6 games. Again, you're trying to look for consistency here. You're trying to find tight ends where the ball's going to go to, and you can pretty much, especially on DraftKings, count for about 8 to 10 points week in and week out, possibly more if he can find the end zone. He's been a bit of a red zone target, not the biggest red zone target in the world, but I think you can go with Jared Cook if you're trying to come off Zach Ertz for the tight end position. And so that really wraps up the video. It's a quicker video here. We're only talking about 4 games. I mentioned already, I'm sticking to the 4-game slate. It might not be a main slate, 2-game main slate, whatever that might be right now, but I think truly sticking to that 4-game gives you more of an advantage, especially if you know what you're doing here. Build better lineups, have more of a player pool, lower ownership, all that good stuff. So stick to the 4-game slate. Hope this video is helpful to you guys. Hopefully you're having a great weekend. Happy New Year to all of you. If you're new here, well, that's pretty crazy because you're jumping into DFS in a wild card weekend slate. But if you haven't done so already, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. If it's helpful, give this video a like. I'll be doing one more video, and that's next weekend. We'll have another 4-game slate as we get into the divisional games. But thank you as always for tuning in. Good luck this weekend, and hopefully I see you atop the leaderboards.